Welcome to this episode of Why Two Ears and One Mouth Works as a Ratio. Richard, I'm so glad you got the ratio word in there. I've been talking about ratios recently because I did when I did my training to profit and loss and balance sheet, it was part of a BTEC National in Business and Finance. We did ratios, and I said, oh, it made my eyes melt because I just couldn't get my head around those numbers. It was just like, oh no. I mean, I could probably remember two, but you have to remember so many for the exams, don't you? Oh, I don't know
You
how I
do.
managed to get through. I did, but I have no idea how. Yeah, so welcome, Richard. Thank you. So why two ears and one mouth works as a ratio?
Well, first, I feel I should start with a rider in this because if my wife and my family are listening, then understand that this is the business me that's talking and the personal me is being hypocritical. So I accept that criticism right from the outset.
Oh, I'm sure that's true for all of us. Don't worry.
It's certainly almost true for all the males in the relationships. But anyway, the one of the fundamental issues, it's so important these days, the relationship that accountants and bookkeepers have with their clients. We live in an automated age. A lot of what we do is increasingly being replaced by automation and software and robots and all the rest of it. And I don't have a problem with that because it's all about saving time, delivering a consistent service. But it highlights even more that our real value, which has always been the case, and the core of our business, which is increasingly the case, comes to the conversations that we have with our clients.
Mm,
And one of the issues that I come across so often is that we're not really good at listening in those conversations. And it's one of the things that holds us back. There's all
mm,
sorts of reasons why. I don't think it's because we're trying to be rude. Because as I've said on many times, accountants and bookkeepers generally are nice people, courteous people. We're not trying to be rude, but we are very worried about what we've got to say next. And because we're worried about what we've got to say next, we don't listen to what the client's saying now. And that creates all sorts of issues and
mm,
certainly holds back the relationship. The client isn't necessarily aware that we're not listening. But what it does do is it keeps the conversation on a very narrow path. It keeps it on that tight agenda. The account, we've talked in the past about one of the problems we have as professional advisors is that we think that we're expected to be able to answer every question and deal with every problem. And therefore, we tend to keep our conversations on quite narrow paths that we
mm.
feel secure on. We don't open them up because we don't want to open a can of worms that we don't know how to address. But by doing that, by keeping our questions very limited and by not listening to the answers either, but I'm thinking about the next question, it's very hard to develop those relationships and develop those conversations. And I think that is a limiting factor for a lot of the advisors going forwards because
Mm.
that's exactly what we need to be doing if we're going to stand out and give value to clients going forward beyond those compliance tracks.
Is the reason, and do not get me wrong, because I've done it myself. Do you think the reason that we are so busy in our heads preparing the next question, so we're only half listening to what's being said, so we may not be getting the tone or the intonations that are being suggested, or even things that are being suggested in the silence, because silence can speak a lot. Do you think that's because we are trying to control? I know you say it's keeping it to a limited path, but is it about making sure that they're controlling what does come up? And that's whatever comes up is something that they know about, because I get the sense when I've spoken to people, accountants and bookkeepers alike, that not knowing what's coming up can be more of a problem for them than any problem that accountancy will give them, because they know what to do and where to go. But if something comes up and it's a feelings based something or behavior type thing, that might be harder for them to deal with. What's your
It's an
thoughts?
interesting point. I hadn't thought of it from a control perspective, but you're exactly right. I you know I it I've always seen it fall into two camps. Either we are, well, the accountant is very product focused. Yeah, we've got a set of accounts to get out, we've got a tax return to get out, and therefore the conversation just needs to be about doing that.
Yeah.
You know, now, from what you say, that I can see that that's actually a control element because we're controlling them within the completion of that product. Or the other side of the equation is there's a fear factor. You know, I
Yeah.
don't want to wander off the path because I don't know where I'm treading.
Mm.
So therefore, again, a control feature to keep on the path. Even something as simple as the very first question that we ask every client, which is, how are you? I, I don't think we ever listen to the answer. Yeah, because we're asking it to be polite, and we want to get on to question number one or topic number one. When actually, and the client answers it in that way. I'm not saying we cut the answer off, but the client answers. We go to the client, how are you? And the client goes, okay, and then we move on to a meeting. When in fact,
Mm.
if we stopped and went, no, just how are you? There's a lot more behind that question than either we or the client give it to, and it's that almost sort of encapsulates this issue with the relationship. If we actually opened up that question,
Mm.
we're opening up the relationship significantly. But we don't, because we either want to keep it on that topic of the product, or we don't want to open up that because we don't know what happens if they say they're not okay. What do we do? It's that side of it. So I think
Mm.
we deliberately, we don't ignore I mean, there are times when you just want to ignore the clients because you're really, really busy. You just want to sit, or you got people knocking at your door, and you just want to sit there and go, no, 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 and you don't want to listen at all. I think that's a different sort of issue. But
Yes,
this is about
absolutely.
recognizing the importance of listening to what's going on around us. Listening to our clients, listening to our colleagues. You know,
Mm.
it's it's easier for us not to listen, but
Yes.
it keeps it all on a very narrow track.
And when I think about it, it you were talking about the how are you, and we don't listen to the answer. I think it's almost become a standard way of greeting, and nobody listens to the answers
No.
because nobody's really interested. I remember somebody saying to me, "Don't ask me that question unless you really want to know the answer." And fortunately, I that is one of my super skills is listening. And I said, I asked, so I want to know. And then they did open up, and it was a much longer conversation. But how many times has somebody answered, "I'm okay, I'm fine." And actually, if you just heard the way they said it, the one thing they are not is okay and fine. And just by saying, "What? Sorry? What do you mean? That didn't sound okay to me, or that didn't sound fine." They're brushing you off because they don't want to go there, and B, they just don't think anybody wants to listen. And sometimes it's not appropriate, but that doesn't mean to say you don't have to do something about it. You can say, "Okay, I hear something's going on, but obviously let's do this now because this is important, and let's have a conversation separately in some way if you're open to listening." But acknowledging that what they've said indicates everything is not fine. I think with
Yeah, but
there's at least a recognition that you've heard.
I think that's the thing because the vast majority of accountants I speak to genuinely care for their clients.
Yes, I think they do.
So when they ask them how they are, why don't they listen to the answer?
Because it's become a habitual greeting like hello.
Mm.
It's
Yeah.
it's an extension to the hello. It's a required something you say to be polite and um yeah, just to be polite even. But we don't really want to know. What we want is why we're meeting them to get on with whatever it is we've got together to do. And so it's almost, yeah, it's just habit. And people
Mm.
don't really want to listen to the answers. Um, I mean, I get it. I've done it myself. Um, when I'm working within my professional environment, that doesn't happen. So I will pick up because sometimes people will be talking and they'll whiz through something really quickly. They'll brush over it, and it that does take skill to sometimes pick that up. But you're like, Whoa, hold on a moment. Can we rewind? What do you
Mm.
mean? when you said, what's going on there? Something was going on, and you've just whizzed through it at whistle stop tour, and then you find out there was something bigger going on. Equally, when you're listening, because they talk about active listening. Well, active listening is just feeding back that you've heard. So repeating what they've said, paraphrasing what they've said, acknowledging they've said something. That's all good stuff, isn't it? Definitely. But deeper listening is listening to things they don't say, listening to the words they use and how they use them, and recognizing in the silences there's something else going on. And they may not say it, but the more you listen, the more you'll hear coming out. So for some people, it may be that you ask them how they are and they don't answer you. They'll go on to the next topic of conversation. That's speaking volumes. They're ignoring what you're saying for some reason. What's that about? Yeah, I think listening comes in many different levels.
Yeah, and
And
it's yeah, maybe we should talk about having two eyes as well as two ears then, because the point you make there, I think, is the important one for listeners and viewers on this conversation today, because we talk about the need to widen the conversation with clients and expand the conversation with clients. From in commercial terms, because we need to deliver a wider level of service and a more human service for our clients in the world we live in today, but also for many accountants, bookkeepers, they want to help, they want to make a difference, and therefore
yeah,
we need to be looking and listening for those indicators of here's something where we should be going. Like you say, what the client doesn't say, the client doesn't reply to that question, but is there is something they're not telling us. There's something that's in there that they're not happy about, or they don't want to share, or are embarrassed to
mm,
share, or whatever it may be, or maybe it's just too
mm,
difficult, too painful. It's when they're talking, we're looking for, okay, not so much what they've said, but what haven't they said, or what was their body language when they said it. And these are the opportunities for us to widen that conversation, not for us to dive in and solve it, because we don't know what we're
yeah.
diving into. But
And you do
yeah,
not want to be solving it. They've
no,
got to do that.
well, quite. But at least to flag it up, because how many times um, have you had a conversation with someone and you've gone, I'm really pleased you brought that up. I'm so pleased you said that. I'm so, yeah, because in other words, I could have brought that up, but didn't think it was appropriate, or didn't want to, or I wanted to share it but didn't. And so I'm so pleased that you've done it, because now I can have that conversation. It's that sort of thing, isn't it? That's
Mm,
we don't limit the conversations we have with our friends or with our family to the areas where we're expert in. We talk about anything and everything, and
yes.
it's the same with clients.
Mm,
Goes back to what we've said in these conversations before about if it's not our area of expertise, we can go, look, actually, this isn't me, but what we should do, or what you should do, or let's get these people involved, or
mm,
here's something you can think about. It's about caring, isn't it?
it
And
is.
that's always what's going to set us aside from the robots and the automation and all the rest of it.
Mm,
It's those human instincts and that human emotions. And as a profession, we don't address that enough. It is a profession that over the years has tried to dehumanize itself. And actually it's not. We're a people to people business. That's what we're all
yeah.
about. and
Mm,
and we need to become more comfortable having conversations that are grown-up conversations.
yeah,
Not,
I
we haven't got to
agree.
fix it, but actually in a lot of cases simply having the conversation fixes it,
Mm,
because you get it out of the person. But if we're not listening, if we're not looking, if we're simply just thinking about this question and the next question and the next question, we're just going to keep them on that narrow path that we've defined in the first place. And I get
yes.
it's a defensive mechanism. We need to be a bit braver than that.
I read a book a couple of years back now, and I still love it in terms of what I learned from it. It was by Chris Voss, Never Split the Difference. And It was recommended to me, and I read it very quickly, few days. And it was basically an FBI hostage taker, negotiator. He wasn't the taker, sorry. FBI, not hostage negotiator, dealing with hostage takers. And he said, his job was listening, really, what it was that they wanted, and how were they expecting it to happen. And he said, never splitting the difference was, you can't say I just want half the hostages. You want them all, and you want them all alive. And what I loved about the book was, there was one thing I took away, or two things technically, was that his questions were always what and how questions, because that does open up the conversation. What's happening for you right now? Now it's just allowing them to talk about anything, not just business. What is happening for you right now? They may talk about the business, but it does allow them to talk the human side of things. And if they're talking about stuff that they want to do, and how are you going to do that? Again, it's opening them up to what they're going to do. So you are not taking on anything. When you use what and how questions, they are processing for themselves what's going on. They'll be doing the heavy lifting. You've just got to be ready with the next question. And what would that look like? And how will you do that? And what will that give you? And how do you think that's going to affect, these two questions? You could keep using them. Yes, you're going to put some others in, but these are really easy ways for you to ask a question and then just shut up and allow them to talk, because it's not a yes no answer, it's an expansive one. And for those who don't get the opportunity to talk through their business stuff with anyone, and let's face it, the accountant and bookkeeper are the ideal people, this is a great opportunity. So I picked that up, a few years ago, and I loved it. So what and how will help you open up the conversation, and you can then pick things that are pertinent to what you're seeing in the accounts, what you're thinking about in terms of the management information and the future of the business. You'll pick up what you need to know. And all
I
you've
like
done
the
is
way
ask the question.
yeah, it creates that engagement, doesn't it? Because you're
Mm,
inviting them into the conversation. You're not
yes,
just firing instructions or questions at them. It's not like an interview. It's
exactly.
yeah.
It's a conversation, isn't it?
I like
Because
what you said there as well about you can then select from what comes your way.
yeah.
You can still choose to not deal with something or ignore something. You can pick up on the things that you then want to pick up on.
Mm. And there will be things that you wouldn't have got necessarily from your standard type of questions that you probably have always used, because the framing of the question really gives them the opportunity to talk about what's going on for them in a bigger way. And so they'll cover a wider expanse of ground. You know, if you narrow that what and how question down to specifically what are you going to do about your profit margins, choo, whereas you say, so what are you going to do to move this business forward? Choo, opens it up. Bring in the more expansive questions. You can drill that down as you go through the meeting. And what are you going to do there? And what are you going to do there? And what are you going to do there? And how is that going to work? And how's that going to work? Blah, blah, blah. But you can open it right up, and then you'll get the true measure of what's going on.
Mm.
Years ago, I was in a very uncomfortable meeting with a very large client that I was one of the project managers for. We had the whole team, sales, ops, billing, operations, all of us in the room, telling this customer what we thought, they were wanting and how it was all going. And at the end of the day one, we were ripped to shreds because we'd never really asked them what was going on in their world. There was a lot of assumptions going on, a lot of assumptions for a contract that had been running for some time. and we were just ripped to shreds, completely demoralized that night. We were supposed to be going out for a meal with the client. It's like none of us really wanted to go. It was just not great at all. But this is the thing, asking better questions, I think, is the probably where I'm going with this. The what and the how are really key for me. Don't worry about anything, not don't worry about the when or the why. Hopefully you know the why, but the what and the how are really important, I think, to open up that conversation and start to explore possibilities and opportunities and potentials, and that then allows you to narrow back down to what you've got in front of you. It makes the conversation more specific, and you'll be reflecting back to the client what you've heard. How powerful is that?
I think the same applies with the team as well. It's yeah, we don't, how much do we listen as we're going around the workplace?
Mm,
Yeah, when we're visiting a client, how much do we listen as we go around the client's workplace? I think, yeah, we can learn a lot, can't we, just by taking in what's happening around us, what, the noises that we hear, what's being said, what isn't being said,
mm.
the um, the sort of the mood music that in the room. There's a lot that we can gain from shutting up for a bit.
Very much so. Simon Sinek talks a lot about this, actually. He talks about, allowing everybody else to have their say before you add anything, because you've then got a good view of what everybody else. So if you are leading a business, allowing the team to all have their say before you say your bit means that whatever you're going to say will take into account everything that they've said, which makes you sound like you're coming from, you know, um, a better position of wisdom. You've listened to them, you've taken on the best bits, you've addressed the ones that are not going to necessarily work, and it just gives you that better place to work from, because
Yeah.
otherwise you are just working on what you think, and rather than what you have heard. I think it's a big area that is worth everybody considering. I can do it really, really well when I'm with a client, but like you, not so with family.
Don't count with family. I think it's a I think that's a really important point. Yeah, particularly if you are entering into a conversation that you think might be a bit contentious. So you've got a client where there's a problem, or you've got a team member where there's an issue.
Mm,
I think to sit back and let them talk first, and not
yes,
to interrupt, not to disagree with the first thing that you disagree with. Just let them use all their ammo. Is how I see it. Get it all off their chest. Because quite often
exactly.
that's just what people want to do. They want to be heard. So,
I
get
think
it
you're
all
right, they
away, get it
do.
off the chest. Then you can sit, because actually there'll be some stuff in there where you think, actually, that might be a fair point. I need to consider that.
Yeah,
But we are too much of a rush to go, and another thing, that sort of thing. It's let them talk, let them get it off their chest, absorb what they're saying,
mm.
see what messages are within that. You are then in a much better place to. You might be seething by the time you get around to it, but actually, then take a few seconds and just
I was
control
going
it
to
over.
say take a break. I
Yeah,
think it's time, let's get a coffee.
yeah, yeah,
That's my recommendation. I was talking about difficult people to an AAT group recently, and one of the things that's really important, and it actually comes from the Bible, although if you go online it says somebody else, is seek first to understand, then be
mm.
understood. And I think that's in essence what we're saying here. You're not doing the talking. You're listening to understand, because you've got no idea what's going on in their head. Do
And
you?
it's interesting, isn't it? Because we start off this conversation by saying that basically we weren't listening because we wanted to control the conversation. What we're now saying is we can still control the conversation by listening, and by listening properly, and then by building up a response and process to that. We don't have
Yeah.
to lead from the front in that respect.
No, and it's a better conversation, isn't it, all
Mm,
round?
yeah,
Because that is what conversation is. It's a two-way thing. not a transactional thing, which is what potentially we were suggesting might be happening more often than not. This is, this is not transactional now. It's a conversation, it's a discussion, it's relating, which is a verb
Yeah.
for a
I always
relationship.
I always use my guide, if you like. I always talk about trying to have a Michael Parkinson style conversation. And you know, for our younger listeners, that will be straight over your heads, but for a lot, it will register. And Michael Parkinson was one of the reasons why he was such a good chat show host was because he would just ask a relatively simple question and then just sit back. And it didn't matter how long they took to answer it. He would just sit back and let them talk. And you compare that with a lot of these chat show hosts who just have got set messages that they want to get out there and they want to talk about the book or they want to do, yeah. And it's just like, well, it's not a very interesting conversation. But
Mm,
Parky, you used to be able to just ask a simple question and then you could just sit back and listen to a really interesting conversation around it. And I try and do that. Try and have it's a conversation. It's a two-way conversation.
yes. That's the relating in relationship. It's a
Mm.
two-way thing, not one. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see what feedback we get on that, because it's a tough one. It's, it sounds very easy, but when you come to, if you've never done it that way, or you're not used to it, because like we talked about in a recent podcast, our confidence levels, that's okay. You don't have to go, and do it all at once perfectly. Just introduce small things. Just start introducing small steps that will take you to a place where you are beginning to have those stronger relationships through better questioning, because the questions will make the difference, I think. Any last parting thoughts on that then?
I think just it's almost like remembering why as an advisor you're doing this. Just remember that you care. Remember that you are interested. Don't
Mm,
remember that you can always control whichever direction you come from on this. But it's very important to understand where that whoever we're talking to, we should care about that conversation. Therefore, it's important to try and interpret and understand where they are right now. And
yeah.
we can only do about that by listening to them, by looking at them, by paying attention to them. If we've
Mm.
got a key point to raise, write it down on a piece of paper, stick it in your agenda so you don't forget it. You don't need to keep it stuck in your head all the time and blocking everything that you should be listening to.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, I was just about to go off at a tangent then. So just so that I don't go off into a tangent, try and keep my last point being is empty your head so that there's space for more to come in. And putting it down on the agenda is a great way of doing it.
Yeah,
Perfect. Oh, brilliant. Listeners, I hope you found that really useful. I know Richard and I really enjoy talking about this and coming at it from, you know, similar but different perspectives because of our own experiences. If you've got questions, please do reach out. Richard's details will be on the podcast element and mine, depending on who is a better fit for you. Thank you very much, Richard. Really enjoyed it. Looking forward
yeah,
to talking to you again soon.
yeah. As always, thank you.